Welcome everybody to this afternoon's gathering, and to further welcome you all, I'm going to ask my colleague Sing to give the welcome address.
Dear friends, on behalf of Lingnan University of Hong Kong Organizing Team and the Global University for Sustainability and Peace Women across the globe, I welcome you all to the PWAG-ASIA Feminism Forum 2020 with the theme Democracy, Transformation and Feminism in Asia. We are honored to have you present online to share your experience and ideas. With such a precious chance for us to learn from each other, I believe these 2 days are going to be intellectually engaging and morally inspiring. Following the fourth South-South Forum on Sustainability by Global University for Sustainability in July 2020, our members of Peace Movement across the globe, PWAG-ASIA Forum, found it important to start an Asian discussion on democracy, transformation, and feminism, especially in this challenging period of pandemic outbreak, along with other political and economic crises, especially health crisis around the world. The organizing team, I'm only one of their representatives, the organizing committee would like to thank for the support of PWAG Switzerland office and the founder, Ruth Gaby Wilmot. For the Gaby, she said, feminist peace work means making women's peace work invisible and usable for sustainable peace process. Because peace is never a military project, but always a civilian project, a collective women's project. I would like to introduce the history of some of the PWAG. The organization of Peace Women across the globe is based on the initiative 1,000 Women for the Nobel Peace Prize, which was set up in 2003 in Switzerland by women active in peace work. 1,000 women were collectively nominated for the 2005 Nobel Peace Prize as representatives of the hundreds of thousands of women peace activities as a symbol of the courageous but mostly invisible peace work undertaken by women. Unfortunately, the Peace Women were not awarded the prestigious prize in 2005. However, the global campaign and the networking conducted by Peace Women across the globe association have helped to make women's commitment expertise more visible. The associate's work has so enabled women to contribute their knowledge to conflict resolution, peace, and democratization process to a greater extent than in the past. Collectively, for this PWAG-ASIA Forum, we have a multiplicity in terms of generation, religion, and faith, gender, class, nationality, language, ethnicity, and capacity. We work in various local communities, urban and rural, on a multitude of issues, in educational institutions and NGOs, community-based organizations, and in offices of governments. What brings us together is our shared commitment to transform the life-destroying conditions people in our communities face, especially women, and the process and structures that produce them. With this online event, the PWAG-ASIA Forum is launching a discussion on the transformation of democracy and feminism in Asia against the backdrop of the current period of political and economical upheaval and uncertainty. What are the challenges? Where lie the hopes of the future? On this 2 days panel, on 21 and 28 November, there are 3 panels to discussion with participants from Bangladesh, China, India, Indonesia, Maya, the Philippines, South Korea, Thailand, and Afghanistan. The themes of each panel are as follows. Today we have 2 panels. The first one Indigenous Women as Knowledge Keepers, Youth the Panel 2, Youth Exchange on Democracy and Feminism, and the Panel 3, 28th of November, the next Saturday, is Intergenerational Feminism Dialogue. And then we have, each panel, we have 3 singers. The first panel for the Indigenous Women as Knowledge Keepers. What is the meaning of Indigenous world knowledge? A traditional knowledge keeper is a person who is trusted, respected, and valued by the community they serve. This knowledge has been through their many experiences, ways of living, and their willingness to help others in times of need. Indigenous knowledge incorporates all aspects of life, spiritually, history, cultural practices, social interactions, language, and healing. And what is the value of indigenous knowledge? Indigenous knowledge can help to meet the broader objectives of society. For instance, conserving the environment, developing sustainable agriculture, and ensuring food security, while its protection encourages the maintenance of traditional practices and lifestyles. We have an old saying in China: it's such a delight to have friends coming far from afar. In this forum, we have participants come from 9 countries, therefore make our delight more than 9-fold. I wish when you recall you are participating in this forum some years later, what you will remember are not only the inspiring ideas, but also ever-fresh friendships we make today through the internet, for we know that what really connects us in this webinar is not some virtual space, but the real world and love we all share. Once again, thank you for joining us in making this forum a memorable event. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Olin Montero from the PWAG Indonesia. Thank you everybody for joining. Thank you for all our panelists, organizing committees, speakers, and also for all the performance that will perform in our events today and also on the 28th next week. So for the first performance, we will give time for Bipasha to give us a blast with her singing. So Bipasha Chakma is active in the indigenous people's rights and women's rights movements in Bangladesh. She has been working also in a lot of research and participatory action research with the Asia Pacific Women's Law and Development on sexual violence against indigenous women and girls and their access to justice in Chittagong Hill tracts of Bangladesh, where she is originally from. In 2013 and 2014, Bipasha conducted another research on political participation of women in Bangladesh with IFES. So Bipasha now is working with UNDP, and she has long work on development organization, Gender and Water Alliance, the National Foundation for Electoral System, Kapaying Foundation, UST, and Green Hill as an expert of gender advocacy and communication experts for the programs of water and sanitation. And also, she's also attended a lot of conference and meeting or gatherings related to climate. And also she's alumni of Global Leadership School of International Indigenous Women's Forum, IIWF in South America. Bipasha, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Olin, for introducing me. So I'm going to sing a song from my indigenous community. It's called Chakma community. And I'm going to sing a song from Chakma community. The meaning of this song is it's a country song that the birds are flying in the sky. So my mind and heart wants to go with them and wants to fly with them too, and wants to see the universe, wants to see the world with the birds. So something like that. An innocent girl, indigenous girl, is singing from remote village and seeing birds under the sky. So it's something it's about a country song, and also some inspirations of a girl that she wants to move around the world with birds. Utoni phege mege mege meulo deba thole mo phoranani jado mage thara loge loge. Utoni phege mege mege meulo deba thole mo phoranani jado mage thara loge loge. Utoni phege mege mege Serohite nanani bhege uri uri git kado sei gidondi mon boli nei phul pudi jado Serohite nanani bhege uri uri git kado sei gidondi mon boli nei phul pudi jado Gedung sale ge no parong thara doge doge. Gedung sale ge no parong thara doge doge. Mo phoranani jado mage thara loge loge. Uttoni phege mege mege meulo deba thole. Mo phoranani jado mage thara loge loge. Uttoni phege mege mege. Serohite nanani bhege uri uri git kado sei gidondi mon boli nei phul pudi jado ei de zori muroi muroi gazo bazo tharumbo sal sile ei dokke guri sade lage go Jarot some ega mone gagai guri berele Jarot some ega mone gagai guri berele Mo phoranani jado mage thara loge loge Uttoni phege mege mege meulo deba tole Mo phoranani jado mage thara loge loge Uttoni phege mege mege It's done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bipasha, for the very lovely song from your country. So everybody, we will continue our webinar today. I will introduce to you our moderator, my friend Shreya. So Shreya is the founder and managing trustee of Standing Together to Enable Peace Trust and a trustee of Nafdanya Trust founded by Dr. Vandana Shiva. With over 15 years of work experience, she has actively been involved in promoting peace education at a governmental and non-government level. And apart from this, she is also co-author 2 books for teachers on ecology with renowned ecologist Dr. Vandana Shiva. She was awarded Rotary Peace Award for her organization contributions in Kashmir and Manipur with youth and teachers in 2012. She currently also works as an independent consultant for various organizations, and her areas of expertise include ecology, community mental health, youth empowerment, prevention of violent extremism, secular ethics, and universal values, and peace education. She has thus spoken and conducted workshops on these issues on many national and international platforms in Spain, Cyprus, South Korea, USA, Azerbaijan, Qatar, Afghanistan, and Italy. So Shreya, please go ahead and start. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olin. You humble me. I didn't expect you to read the whole thing. So anyway, without much ado, I welcome all of you to this lovely, it's afternoon here for most of us, but evening if wherever you are. And I look forward in all humility and in all joy to listen to our sisters from the Indigenous community and share their insight and knowledge in the upcoming panel. Just a reminder to all the speakers, I will give you a warning signal at about 8 minutes. You have about 10 minutes for presentation, each of you. And after that, we have a Q&A session so that all of us can have a chance to interact with you and gain better insight about your work. And before we carry on to me introducing each speaker, I thought I'd start the afternoon off with a beautiful poem. And much like most Indigenous knowledge, it is a oral tradition, and a lot of time the poet's name gets lost somewhere. So this poet's name also is lost somewhere. We don't know who the poet is, but the poet's sentiments are beautiful, and I would love to share it with you. Burn our land, burn our dreams, pour acid onto our songs, cover the sawdust, the blood of our massacred people. Muffled with your technology, the scream of all that is free, wild, indigenous, destroy. We destroy our grass and soil, raze to the ground every farm, every village our ancestors have built, every tree, every home, every book, every law, and all the equity and harmony. Flatten with your bombs every valley, erase with your edicts our past, our literature, our metaphor, denude the forest and the earth till no insect, no bird, no word can find a place to hide. Do that and more. I do not fear your tyranny. I do not despair ever, for I guard one seed, a little live seed, that I shall safeguard and plant again. So, with that, I would like to start our session by welcoming our speakers. We have today with us Nedine Helen Sulu, an Indigenous women activist from Indonesia, AMAN National Council region. Nedine is a Mendoza Indigenous woman. I'm so sorry if I pronounce the names incorrectly, my apologies. In North Sulawesi. She is the initiator and founder of Koha Indigenous School, or Sekolah Adat Koha. She has been working with Indigenous people movement since 2009. Since 2017, she is the woman she is the woman and young people Indigenous representative at the AMAN National Council, the Bipasha Indigenous People Alliance in Indonesia. So I request Nedine to make her presentation and to start the panels off. Thank you so much, Nedine.
I would like to deliver my presentation, and I was tasked with Olin to deliver stories of women who are the gatekeepers of ancestral traditions. So this is me in my indigenous clothing. This is for a dance, a war dance. This is worn when we perform a war dance. Indigenous women are always proud to wear this. And this is an example of an Indigenous woman wearing Indigenous clothing from Minahasa. So Indigenous women have the role and function to sustain the life resilience of their communities based on ancestral origins handed down generation to generation on customary lands that have sovereignty over land and natural resources, as well as the social aspects of their life. There are three main aspects that realize the identity of women. First is knowledge. Knowledge owned by Indigenous women is a vital foundation in carrying out their role as the keepers of sovereignty and food security for their family and their community. We talk about sovereignty because security is a way to ensure that we have sufficient food. But if we have sovereignty, we can ensure that the food available is in line with the traditions and the ways and methods that our ancestors taught us. Second is authority. The authority of Indigenous women is closely linked with Indigenous women's authorities to regulate sustainability of their lives and resources available to them, their communities, and their families. And third is areas that are managed by Indigenous women as spaces or lands used by Indigenous women to produce or reproduce knowledge and their authority from time to time in line with various changes that occur to their customary areas. These areas are closely linked to sources of their lives that ensure the sustainability of their lives or the continuity of their lives. This includes water resources, places to fish, medicinal forests, and other areas that are accessed specifically by Indigenous women as a collective. Without these lands that they manage, that means that their knowledge and authority will be lost. That is why recognition of these lands that Indigenous women manage is vital in maintaining the sovereignty of Indigenous peoples. So let me talk about Indigenous women in the pandemic, or actually prior to the pandemic as well. Along with other Indigenous women, we used to manage our Indigenous lands or our communal lands. We had forests, seas, lands where we planted vegetables, vegetable patches, vegetable gardens. We planted maize, rice, cassava, and even spices such as ginger, chili, fruits. We had pigs, we farmed pigs and chickens. We even had collective patches, and we had individual areas of land that we managed with our families. So for us, Indigenous women, before the pandemic, we already started that. And during the pandemic, we became even more focused on managing our customary lands. So we established a lockdown. We closed all entrances and exits to our land. So we were free to interact. We were able to go to our lands. We could go to the seas without being afraid of the virus spreading to our communities. And when the world became scared of the virus and a predicted food crisis, Indigenous women were not scared of a food crisis because during this pandemic, I I've been harvesting. We've been harvesting maize, rice. I have 200 kilos of maize in my warehouse. And we have hundreds of chili trees. So we are actually harvesting food during a time when the world is facing a food crisis. And we always maintain our traditions, weaving, weaving rattan, weaving textiles, carrying out our customary rituals of opening lands. And we have the Tolak Bala ritual. There's different ways of carrying out these rituals, and there are various names for this ritual, but essentially the Tolak Bala ritual seeks to protect indigenous communities from evil spirits, including the virus, the COVID-19 virus. And another tradition that we maintain is to barter our harvest. So, for example, I bartered chili recently with a different community where they had quite a surplus of rice. So we bartered our harvests and our crops. Prior to the pandemic and during the pandemic was closely observing laws on recognition of indigenous rights. So village regulations, regional regulations. So at the provincial level, at the district level, and at the national level, we also closely observe and have a lot of different activities around the Indigenous Peoples Bill. And in our villages and our communities, we think a lot about how to strengthen our capacity as Indigenous women. We try to elaborate our essence, our core being of being Indigenous women. We try to upgrade or we try to enhance our capacity. We try to draft input for village regulations, and we also try to enhance our political capacity as Indigenous women because there are many Indigenous women in their respective communities who are ignored when it comes to politics. And Indigenous women have political rights that they need to talk about directly. Their voices cannot be represented by others. We sit together and we talk about how to build our capacity. In my community, in Minahasa, there's our life philosophy that has been enacted by our ancestors. Sito Tumotomoto. People live to give life to others. So we need to share what we have. We have to complement each other and we have to learn from each other because everyone is a teacher to Indigenous women. Here are some photos. Here's a photo of an Indigenous woman in NTT, and she's weaving textiles. And here are some photos of village meetings. You can see here women conducting the village meetings. So, and here is the process of weaving. And here are Indigenous women planting rice. And this is a photo of us working together to clean ginger. And we also as a collective, we plant ginger. And here's a photo of a collective vegetable patch owned by Indigenous women. So plant together, harvest together, and then everybody enjoys the fruits of our labor together. During the pandemic, it brought about some serious threats because there was some land grabbing and there was violence enacted towards Indigenous women. So in these 5 locations, this happened in Kampung Durian Selama, Kalandoji Temuan, Air Ujang, Besipayan Laman Kinipan. There was land grabbing, houses were destroyed, and land occupation. And Indigenous women were at the front of this, so they had the police and army stomped on their feet, punched them in the stomach. Some Some of the women fainted. We had some children who were hysterical because they saw their mothers being violently attacked by government security forces. We have a work strategy, and so we work to strengthen Indigenous women's organizations at the village, regional, district, national, and global level to build awareness of our identity as women and Indigenous women. And we develop networks with other organizations such as feminist organizations, environmental organizations, etc. We document the knowledge and experience of Indigenous women. So we have a magazine for Indigenous women, and we build the capacity of Indigenous women in various aspects such as politics, law, economy, ecology, on a domestic level, public level, as well as on a national level. And we also advocate for policies that fulfill the rights of Indigenous women. So we have here a photo of Indigenous women from Batak. We call them Inang. So she's cooking on wooden. This is how she cooks. She cooks using wood. So they maintain everyone's lives from upstream to downstream. They maintain and sustain the lives of others. Indigenous women are the source of life, as well as the guardians of Indigenous people's lives. Iayatu Santi. So this means raise your sword and go to war, because Indigenous peoples, even women, Indigenous women are constantly under threat, and Indigenous women until now keep urging the government to recognize and fulfill the rights of Indigenous peoples by passing the bill on Indigenous peoples. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Nadine, and for sharing your story of hope and resilience and how you dealt during the pandemic with fear. And it saddens me to say that Indigenous women face fear even during non-pandemic time, and police brutality is something that everybody knows that even in India, Indigenous women witness. And we are grateful to you for carrying on the good fight and for showing us the way to resilience. I would like to now also tell people who are attending the seminar that if you have any questions, please type them out in the Q&A section on Zoom, and we will take them up after everybody has spoken. So with that, I would like to go on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is a speaker from China, Zhao Ling. Zhao Ling was born in 1980 in a worker's family of Chongqing City, southwest China. Since she was a university student, she has been working as a volunteer for children and women in rural China. She became one of the youngest members nominated for 1,000 Women for Nobel Peace Prize 2005. At that time, she was a graduate student and the president of the Peasants Children's China Rural Development and Promotion Association in Beijing Normal University. After being nominated, she got to know a lot of stories of peace women and was deeply moved by them. She made up her mind to learn from them and devote her life to the cause of women and children. After she graduated in 2006, she worked as a social worker for migrant children, rural children, and women. In 2009 and 2016, she worked as a coordinator of Peace Women across the Globe China office. She called on many members of students, communities, citizens, and young people to become volunteers. In the last 4 years, she has become working as a teacher in an orphanage, some primary school, and nine-year school in the rural area. So thank you so much, Zhao Ling, for joining us, and we look forward to your presentation.
I really appreciate the opportunity to speak here. I'm Zhao Ling, Peace Women in China. Volunteer teacher in rural China for women and children for over 10 years. Today, my topic is local wisdom passed on in Shaxi town, Yunnan, China. I'll show you the contents of our speech. First, introduction to Shashi. Second, self-reserved seeding farm and community-supported agriculture. The third, inheritance of local handicrafts and mutual help in community. The fourth, proud of you. Now let's start. Located in the southeastern part of the three parallel rivers in Yunnan protected areas, Shashi ancient town has a long history that can be traced back to the spring and autumn and the warring states periods. It's about 770 BC to 221 BC. Shashi has a greenable climate, beautiful natural scenery, and rich natural resources. Shashi ancient town as one of the world's 100 most endangered sites, listed by the World Monuments Fund, is a place where you can breathe in fresh air around the clock. Shashi town was built on the remains of an ancient market town and was once an active trade stop on the Southern Silk Road that connected southwest China's hinterland with Southeast Asia and onto Europe. With the end of the caravans bringing war horses from Tibet in exchange for Yunnan tea, Shashi began to lose its prominence as a trading center and fell into decline. This and is vibrant, but limited to buying and selling of goods from the area. The bi-ethnic people from all the villages in Shashi Valley and the Yi people from the surrounding mountains come here to trade everything from fresh produce to supplies and horses. In the market day, you can see minority women dressed in colorful traditional costumes, and men will often lead pack mules to carry supplies back to their mountain villages, which much like in the days of the tea horse road hundreds of years ago. And we'll talk about some self-reserved seed farming and CSA. In fact, Shashi town is in Jianchuan County. Jianchuan County is a majestic county with 87% of its mountainous area dominated by agriculture. The mountains of Jianchuan County are blessed with a rich natural environment, and the hardworking villagers have adopted the original ecological planting method, retaining many high-quality old varieties of crops, such as red heart potatoes. It's only grown at an altitude of nearly 3,000 meters. One of the traditional staple foods of Bai people and Yi people in Jianchuan County. Potatoes has a delicious taste and a higher nutritional value than ordinary potatoes. It is said that red heart potato is reserved only in Peru and a few mountainous areas in Vietnam. However, due to the inconvenience of transportation, many good things cannot be sold out in reasonable price. With little income from farming, the young and middle-aged people have to go out to urban areas to earn more money, leaving behind mostly women, old people, and children. The villagers have formed a good tradition of helping each other. During sowing or harvesting seasons, the family is too busy. So many villagers around them always go to help. We also help the local people to sell their farm produce to big cities for good price. With many citizens supported, we gradually build up a model of community-supported agriculture. Organized many students and families from big cities to learn from the local people. That's we'll talk about inheritance of local handicrafts, and mutual help in community. We learned from local old people and women to make traditional food, learned to sing Bai people tunes and to do folk dance, learned carpentry and wood carving skills from village craftsmen and even craftswomen. Principles of rammed earth building and participate in practice. Explore the relationship between the living customs, traditional crafts, local history, and folk culture, and so on. So, can you guess what the women are making? I tell you, they are making the melt sugar. It's a traditional food in China, and it's very sweet. Come back home for the Spring Festival because it's the Chinese New Year. Spring Festival every winter, the village is working together to build houses with rammed earth. From the very beginning of the building house, relatives and the whole family will work together. The bean raising ceremony is the whole village men work together to pour up whole beam of the two-story building. After the completion, firecrackers will be set off to celebrate. Some people will stand on the beam and throw down red steamed bread, candies, and small coins. All the men, women, old and young in the village are snatching under the beam. It is said that those who snatch it will have good luck. Meanwhile, the women of the whole village make dozens of by 8 big bowls banquet together. Rules from the elderly association in the village. All the villagers participating in the bean raising ceremony will eat the banquet happily together. After the wooden beans are finished, men began to tap their lawyers into a wall, and the women help them. The whole village, men, women, old and young, will be able to build a two-story civil structure house in 2 or 3 months. It is putting tiles on a roof. A dozen men in the village put tiles on the roof, and children pass the tiles up one by one. Generally, in more than half a day, all the tiles on the roof are put. At noon, the family who built the house prepare a rich by 8 big bowls and invite the men, women, old and young who help to eat. If a special construction team is invited to do this work, not only the price is high, it can't even be finished in a week. Intelligent villagers, every household, through this mutual help building process, not only save time, labor, money, but also preserve excellent traditional crafts and folk customers, and let everyone feel the dignity and value of their labor. At last, I want to say I'm really proud of the women. We are doing all kinds of rural community service work to promote the happiness of left-behind women, children, and the elderly with a self-help empowerment model in Shaxi. In fact, the rural life let all my family learn a lot. I really appreciate the sincere and tough women. They are not only the main force of agricultural labor, but also the soul of the whole rural community and their families. Whenever my family and I are in trouble, it is them who extend helping hands to us. Warm words, bowls of steaming hot food, dance and singing around the campfire with them. They are my role models and also the force of my life. Dear sisters, I'm so proud of you. So, I want to sing a song. The song is Proud of You for all the women sisters. Love in your eyes, sitting silent by my side, going on, holding hands, walking through the nights. Hold me up, hold me tight, lead me up to touch the sky, teaching me to love with heart, helping me open my mind. I can fly, I'm proud that I can fly, to give the best of my heart till the end of the time. Believe me, I can fly, I'm proud that I can fly, to give the best of my heart, the heaven in the sky. Okay, thank you for warm. I'm really proud of all the dear women sisters around the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zhao Ling, for ending on such a sweet note and for sharing with us this beautiful story of togetherness. How all of us can, if we put our heads and hearts and hands specifically together, we can look after each other. Even food and shelter, which the government makes a lot of noise about not giving to everyone. You guys have shown us how it can be done with a sense of community, and also for highlighting the problem of urban migration. I hope in the question answer session, all of you will be able to address a little bit more. Just a short reminder to everybody who's here today with us that you can type in your questions and and share with us. And without much ado, I go to the fabulous nightingale of Bangladesh, Bipasha. And since we already heard all the wonderful things you've been doing, I'll just hand over the mic to you and welcome you to speak for 10 minutes in this panel. So welcome Bipasha, Communications Officer, IBFCR Project, UNDP Bangladesh. Thank you so much.
At first, I would like to give a thanks to the organizers for creating opportunities to share my experience to overcome the future challenges that we face, but also to become an active agent of change by being involved in the decision-making processes. And although Shreya already introduced me as all of you are already know that I'm working for UNDP. In fact, I have been working for UNDP Bangladesh for more than 6 years, but please be sure that today all views will be discussed and expressed are my own. It's not UNDP. So please count me as personal Bipasha, not as the personnel of UNDP. So thank you very much also Lai and Krishanti for connecting me. We were very good friends, and we took a training, we received a training in Nepal in 2013. So it's nice to see you after a long time. And it's great, you know, to be connected with old friends again. I really enjoy that. Thank you very much for connecting me. And actually, I was asked to share my experience how Indigenous women adapt and keep their knowledge in time of climate change and a crisis or crisis of COVID-19 pandemic to sustain our livelihood, means Indigenous women's livelihood. So before starting the discussions, I want to tell about the Bangladesh positions regarding coronavirus. That as of yesterday, shows that according to the Bangladesh government, there are confirmed 443,434 COVID-19 cases in Bangladesh, and including 6,322 related deaths in Bangladesh already. So case fertility rate is 1.32%. But still we see that tourist spots are filled with tourists and save few adoring masks. There is no way of knowing that we are in the midst of the pandemic with numbers of infected and deaths on the rise. So it still do not have cold in Bangladesh. And so some see it as the blessings of, as the coronavirus apparently thrives better in cooler temperatures. And so where I am talking from, let me just give you a little brief that Bangladesh is a country in South Asia. So I think all of, some of you know, and maybe some of you don't know, that's why I'm giving a little very brief, which is bordered by India to its west and north and east, and Myanmar to its southeast and to its south. It faces the Bay of Bengal. And also the over 50 indigenous groups inhabits in Chittagong Hill Tracts, and plainlands areas of Bangladesh with their distinct languages, cultures, and heritage since immemorial. And according to our 2011 census, we represent 1 to 2% of the total populations of Bangladesh in the 98% of 98% of Muslim majorities country. So, so let's come now the main point that how indigenous women are just surviving and keeping their traditional knowledge. You know that like other indigenous communities around the world, Bangladeshi indigenous communities are constantly struggling to maintain their rights, their traditions, their knowledge in a system still dominated by the mainstream community, major community of Bangladesh, as well as all of you know that Western worldview. So they face the challenge of living in two worlds, the indigenous and non-indigenous one. So in constant tension with each other, with the latter having more power in sharing the former. And the traditional knowledge and the livelihood in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, because I came from Chittagong Hill Tracts, are deeply rooted with nature, including sustainable practices and land and natural resource management. So, so if we look at the history for the centuries that indigenous populations have shifted from invasions and oppressions, and oftentimes they have seen their knowledge eclipsed by mainstream knowledge and imposed on them through country institutions. And then yet the indigenous women have been managing their traditional knowledge to survive for centuries, adapting in many different ways to adverse climate conditions and managing to create sustainable livelihood systems. Now, so, and I can confidently tell that indigenous women in the Chittagong Hill Tracts have been showing leadership in acting swiftly to protect their communities, my communities, even there are some individual freedoms and curtailed. Individual freedoms are curtailed. So particularly in the lockdown, indigenous women actually showed leadership positions by protecting cultures, community, and nature. So when I look back to my community, I always see my mother there. So I wish my mother is listening to me from heaven. So unfortunately, she is not here. She lives in my heart now. So when I talk about indigenous community, I feel that I'm talking about my mom. So yeah, because indigenous women are showing leadership. They are just traditionally most of the rural indigenous women depending on subsistence farming, but due to the increasing dispossessions of land and resource caused by the conflict over the years, land grabbings and the climate change, their livelihoods have become highly vulnerable. And meanwhile, many indigenous women also migrated to cities and to look for alternative livelihoods to survive their existence. So apart from these barriers I mentioned above just now, the indigenous women ensured the first point is the ensured food security by harvesting food and preserving harvest like rice, maize, and other crops, seasonal crops, making dry the seasonal crops for themselves. So indigenous community means that it's not community means a lot, you know. Community means not individual, community means collective community. So indigenous people still believe that collective community. So they overcome, apart from the barriers, they overcome the food starving, because they preserved and also they harvested by themselves, and they always go for organic harvesting. So that's why they are not fully depending on the in the market, on the market system. And secondly, the health, how while the prolonged COVID-19 pandemic is exacerbating the country's poor health conditions of the citizens in Bangladesh with fragile services and critical public service deficits, we see very few impacted indigenous women, especially almost no indigenous women got impacted of coronavirus during this pandemic. Still now, we don't see any remarkable cases that we can count with general citizens. And I would like to say that. And still, although we have some barriers like health emergencies, we don't have any health emergencies. And when indigenous women face some problems, health problems, we don't have any local health services. So that's different things. But I'm talking that how indigenous women are surviving in the coronavirus with their traditional knowledge. So they are having good health systems like eating organic food and also keeping social distance with others. And of course, I want to tell, and many journalists also already published in daily newspapers, that traditional self-quarantine system of indigenous peoples in the Chittagong hill tracts is not really new. And countrywide self-isolations of the indigenous peoples is not new. The community follows social distancing and self-isolation, including boosting their immune system using traditional medicine in a situation of lack of access of medical supplies. So the indigenous communities practice temporarily self-isolation, led by women, to protect its members during a crisis, to protect the family members during a crisis or after a tragedy. So, and sorry, I can show you the pictures that bamboo fences are conspicuously placed at every entrance of the village to warn that the area is off limits to drive away bad spirits causing the disease while preventing transmission. So self-isolation is not new in the indigenous community led by indigenous women. And of course, I want to say that protecting cultures and environment, about protecting culture and environment where women also in the leadership positions. The indigenous women for indigenous women in Bangladesh, culture is as inherent of life as air and water, but modern life, along with the never-ending marginalization, colonizations, and discriminations pull populations further away from it. And not only so indigenous women's daily livelihoods always just contributing to the natural resource management. And there are some positive impacts that I have seen that during this pandemic since March, that indigenous women created a digital platform for sharing indigenous knowledges so that they can share their knowledge, how, like, if someone feels sick, how they will treat by themselves without going to hospital, or any without taking any health services, like drinking plenty of ginger water, or plenty of some roots of wild herbs, something like that. So this digital online platform really helped us, those who are living in city, because I'm living in a city, that I fully aware. I am also one of the organizers, to connecting with the remote areas women, so that I can be informed about the diseases and how to remove from the body, or from the family. And another good news is that online entrepreneurship development has been built among indigenous women. They are doing online business using their traditional knowledge. They are making their handicrafts. They are making available their handicrafts, and also ornaments and clothes, and also jewelries and many things. They are just now, they are making them offline but selling them online. So we are the, educated women. How we are helping them? We are just connecting the community women, so that she can sell to sell the product. And organic farming availability for the city dwellers through that platform, online entrepreneurship platform. Women are selling also their organic farming products. So now I want to tell that indigenous women's knowledge are not limited to only remote areas. We are trying to bring them out, but only one problem is government. I already told that why indigenous knowledge that has been practicing year after year, but why government is not giving recognitions. That's a very, that's the issue of the ego and politics. I want to say that it's the ego and politics. But keeping that barriers, women are not keeping them aside. Women are still doing, selling their knowledge, disseminating their knowledge. That's the hope. There is hope. And I also observed that the women came forward proactively and humanely to help the indigenous communities and to survive in the lockdown time. So, and also indigenous women, they also what called that, some indigenous women group, they are sharing their knowledge skill, as I said, that various digital platforms like social media, Facebook, Facebook, and other platforms, that where virtual group meetings they have been, it is going on. And finally, I just want to tell that there is no recognitions by the government that indigenous women contributing to society, contributing to the community, contributing to environment, all kinds of good things are with indigenous women because they are gaining the knowledge from their ancestors, from mom, from grandmom, from grandparents, but still the country, the states is not giving recognition on that, and they are not coming to us to learn. So I always tell that it's an issue of ego and politics. So indigenous women are not widely, women's knowledge are not widely circulated. And so that's why I urge to the organizers or to my friends that to continue a research to see how indigenous women are cooperating society and the environment in a proper way, in sustainable way, and how indigenous women's actions and knowledge and implications for are implicating for the sustainable development agenda. So, and a research should be carried out on women knowledge to get recognition by these states to let know the global participants about the indigenous women's knowledge. So thank you very much for hearing me. Maybe I don't know whether you are benefited or not, or I believe that I believe I always count time and that someone is listening to me for 10 minutes. Am I giving them good informations or not? Something like that. I always give value on time. So thank you very much, Shreya, again, and thank you very much for listening me. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bipasha ji, and fabulous presentation. And of course, we listened to you. Sorry, I had some internet problems, so I was in and out, but I heard you. And I'm so happy that you shared these wonderful stories of adapting to the pandemic by digitizing the knowledge so that the knowledge is also there for everybody to make use of. And also for highlighting that how the pandemic is a double-edged sword. In a way, we are seeing that the indigenous community is more resilient in the face of the pandemic. At the same time, it's also highlighting how much isolation is there of the community. Thank you so much for your inputs on that. And I look forward to the question answer session where I'm sure people will have more questions to ask you on it. Going to the next person, next panelist, and our last panelist for today is Florian Mendoza, an indigenous woman activist from Philippines. She is a Tundere woman who is a native of, I can't pronounce this, I'm so sorry. Known for her work for the advancement and popularization of rights of indigenous people, including indigenous women. She is a graduate of Bachelor of Science in Agriculture at the University of Southern Mindanao and earned another degree as a registered midwife. She's one of the pioneering alumna from the Philippines who undertakes women's peace leadership and security at the Center for Peace Conflict Studies in Siem Reap, Cambodia. She co-founded the Tundere Lamborghini Women's Organization, a grassroots-based organization of tribal women in hinterland of Mindanao province. She then was involved in many advocacy work and where she authored and studied, published by Institution of Autonomy of Governance on the impact of early and arranged marriages on Tundre and Lambagian women. Is also a proponent in pushing for the rights of IP women in crafting of IRR of Muslim Mindanao Autonomy Act 290 or the GAD Code of ARMM and Muslim Mindanao Autonomy Act of 241. So with that, I welcome Florian Mendoza to start with the inputs for the.
Thank you for having me in this forum. So what I am presenting to you this afternoon, I have a brief outline just to run you through of who are the non-Moro indigenous peoples women in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao. As we all know, The Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao is a newly created political entity as a result of the 4-decade Moro rebellion in southern Philippines. And then secondly, I will also run you through on what are the initiatives in keeping their knowledge in times of climate change, crisis corona, and sustain their livelihood. And then also run you through on the current status of these non-Moro indigenous women in transition period. When I said transition period, because we were in conflict for more than 4 decades, and now we are in post-conflict and normalization. Yeah, so this is where we are. The non-Moro indigenous peoples women in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao is situated mainly in the mainland of the BARM or the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. We have the one in Maguindanao, the Tuduray, the Lambangian, the Dulangan, Manobo. And then another province also in Lanao del Sur, we have the Ilianan, Tigohanon, Manobo, Batanes, Subanan, Matigsalog, Higaonon, Talaandig, Umayamnon, Calagan, and also in the island province, we have the Samal and Bajau. So at the moment, we are about 122,000 in terms of household population or 2% of the 4 to 7 million population of the Bangsamoro. Yes, pardon me, we had a problem with our connectivity. And then I am trying to run you through now on the distinct role of indigenous Muslim Mindanao. We have what we call the Kafaduan Libon. The Kafaduan Libon is the arbiter who resolved cases of murder, theft, public scandal, petty quarrels, infidelity, slander, land grabbing, domestic abuse, and rape. And we have And then we have also the Fanday Libon. So this is the birth attendant who is in charge in the safety delivery of mother and the infant. And then we also have what we call the officiator of rituals. We call that the Libon Belian. So the Libon Belian is the healer and at the same time in charge in the gathering of herbs in the forest and also in charge in healing illnesses at the same time in charge also in the preparation of paraphernalia for rituals whenever there are important events or festivities and also lead the rituals. And then at the same time, they are not just performing the traditional roles, they are also farmers, and they are also wife and mother with an average of 7 to 12 children. And then in spite of the respective personal and family concerns, indigenous women embrace the role of the Kofeduan Libon or an arbiter, even if it is means exhausting personal and family resources, time, money, and property, in order to settle conflict in a traditional and peaceful way. Many of the IP women in the barn inherit their capacity and knowledge as arbiters from their parents and elders who have carried out the same customary role as prime social responsibility before them. The next slide photo that I am showing to you is the next photo that I am showing to you is a tribal march. That's a tribal march to defend the forest. It was a foot march from one tribal community to another to protest the intensified logging, mining, and agribusiness in the ancestral domain and remaining forests of the Teduray tribe that started in 2006. It was a 7-day caravan that aimed to protect the issues and struggle of indigenous women in the barn for public discourse and rally public support and pressure for the government to fully implement the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act and at the same time to include it in the Bangsamoro Basic Law of the Bangsamoro. This journey commences in commemoration also of the United Nations Declaration of the Indigenous People that was adopted in 2007 and also culminate every October as the National Indigenous Peoples Month in the country. So indigenous leaders of the lead this journey together with the indigenous people in the adjacent areas of the former defunct autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao. So we have Eromanon Manodbu also in the strategic areas in Mindanao where they pit stop and share the stories, struggle, hopes, and aspirations to public forum. The organization also heading a ritual uh, in response to the call for a collective prayer uh, for the de-escalation of conflict, for the de-escalation of conflict. And then this another photo is also, we call it the Manamantad. So the Manamantad, the slides I am showing to you is a Manamantad. This one was taken in October 27, 2012 when 500 members of the Taduray, Lambangian, and Dulangan Manobo tribes held a kanduli at the peak of Mount Firis. So this was the first Thanksgiving ritual at the sacred mountain after more than 40 years of war in Maguindanao. The men and women of the Taduray and Lambangian and Dulangan Manobo tribes gathered to this cultural march of peace, which was also called the Manamantad. The Manamantad was the first ritual held by the indigenous people in the sacred mountains after 40 years of being driven away by armed hostilities. So Manamantad was served as an indication that peace may really be in the offing, having been able to stage in after the signing of the framework agreement on the Bangsamoro. It was also an indication of the indigenous people's self-affirmation of the right to perform cultural practices within the Bangsamoro region. So this displacement due to recurring conflict while facing the global pandemic uh, on May 29, 2020, 884 households were displaced and then 98 households are still at the evacuation camps while facing the global pandemic and they are unable to return yet to their places of origin. There are also incidents of harassments against the non-Moro indigenous peoples and then successive cases of harassments against the IAPs until present time. There are also recorded loss of lives and then the minors have been killed by believed to be members of the extremist groups. And just recently, 2 IP farmers have been also killed again. And on March 17, 2020, they implemented a lockdown in the Philippines and then involved community quarantines, face masks, and physical distancing. This limited the movement of people from one house to another, from one community to another community. The lockdown reminded women of old stories passed through generations of highly transferable sickness, where death took not only individual but whole communities. There were so many victims that those who offered assistance to previous victims were infected and thereafter met deaths in an instant. Many lives were lost and left unburied. It was believed to be brought by powerful spirit as a form of discipline and punishment to humanity for desecrating the sacred relationship between humans and natural environment. And the spirits, the story is very devastating and frightening, and therefore deemed improper of remembering or retelling. With due respect and honor to those who died to the height spirit, who brought sickness to humanity. The disease was recalled by a storyteller. We call it in our local dialect as the dulet. Tulak and the malas, these are indigenous rituals, is a response to COVID-19 and dulet are similar in many aspects. First, they are both transmitted by a carrier to the next person through body contact. Second, it is a disease that makes proper medication difficult to come by. Third, forms of lockdown and physical distancing were implemented as preventive measure. In this situation, the demalas as a form of physical distancing meant leaving the houses temporarily to stay with nature, especially along the rivers, to fish and to hunt without the presence of any face mask. Community member would go to high grounds and shout messages to relatives or friends whom they want to share items or goods. They would then leave the pack items they wish to share in a safe place where it will be picked up. This was a way of avoiding face-to-face or body contact in order to prevent transmission. What was different then was that dulet protocol were cordially followed. I will just miss some of my slide about the social cohesion that we are doing through provision of seed dispersal, hygiene kits, and food packs to the affected non-Moro indigenous community and their families, and the impact of COVID-19 pandemic to the indigenous community in the Bangsamoro. Social cohesion through provision of seed dispersal, hygiene kits, and food packs to the affected non-Moro indigenous women and their families uh, has a goal of providing food assistance and provision of planting materials among indigenous youth, women, and their families and communities by engaging in a communally and individually and
I think we've lost Froilyn Mendoza again.
indigenous women to share about the roles as ordinary time, like occurrence of pandemic and how indigenous communities. Yeah, I think that ends my presentation. I apologize. We had a very slow connectivity, and this is
No, it was our pleasure, Froilyn Mendoza, and even with bad connectivity, you were able to share great insights, specifically your tools of nonviolent resistance that you shared with the 7-day march and the petition. I think we can all learn from that. I think Bangsamoro has been a place of conflict for a very long time, but the women of Bangsamoro have always shown the way for peace and have charted the way in very difficult terrain. So we salute the women of Bangsamoro for it. And with this, we come to our section of question and answers with the speakers. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box and I will direct it to the speakers. The first question is for all speakers. I would request you all to respond within 2 minutes to the question because it's a long question and I'm sure there's a lot to say, but we'll all have 2 minutes to talk to each other. So the first question is, this is by Soumya. I would like to know the views of the panelists on the role of indigenous women in leadership position within their community, to not be limited to knowledge keepers, but also as decision makers and spokesperson related to indigenous knowledge systems and issues of biopiracy. So I think what the person is trying to ask is to talk about what are the leadership roles and how are the leadership roles taken up in indigenous community and how empowered are indigenous women in leadership roles. So thank you. We could start with Nedine and then we would go on to Laozing, then we can go to Bipasha as we just spoke. So we'll just go in the same order. So starting with you, Nedine.
Ya, baik. Terima kasih. Mohon maaf kalau agak berisik karena di tempat saya sedang hujan deras, kemudian angin kencang. Semoga juga tidak padam listrik karena kalau listrik padam jaringan internet saya otomatis langsung mati. Jadi menjawab pertanyaannya adalah kalau di komunitas adat atau di masyarakat adat kami di Minahasa khususnya, perempuan
women are equal to men, and in my community, we are ritual leaders. Women, Indigenous women lead rituals, and there's around 2,400 Indigenous communities in Indonesia. But this situation now is different. After colonization, and the ways of thinking have been contaminated by the colonialists, where they position everything based on the standards of male thinking. So the position of Indigenous women, they face layer upon layer of discrimination. For example, for me, I'm an Indigenous woman and I'm discriminated against, and I'm a member of, and I'm a young person. And as a young Indigenous person, it's very difficult for us to have space to speak. Our right to speak, right to give an opinion is a right that is inherent to a young Indigenous person or an Indigenous woman. And this is a big challenge for us as Indigenous women in our own Indigenous communities. It's difficult for us to have space. And space is never just given to us. We have to fight for the space that we are allowed to occupy. And in the Indigenous peoples movement, a lot of women, a lot of women, and for a lot of youth, we can only access very limited spaces. And add on to that, the Indonesian government system, everything, development plans, policies, all of those things are so far removed from women's perspectives. Everything is positioned on men's standards. So this is a huge challenge for Indigenous women of this country. We fully realize if we don't do something about this, then the rights of Indigenous women to speak, to make decisions, will vanish completely. Thank you. Thank you for your question. And I hope I was able to answer your question.
The question is, what is the role of Indigenous women in decision making, and how do they respond to decision making situations? How do they come into a space where they have a voice beyond knowledge keepers? This is, I think, more of a political question, if I'm not mistaken, but you can interpret it the way you like.
Okay, maybe I cannot answer it to the point, but I can, now I got your questions. Then actually the militarizations in the Chittagong Hill Tracts have been restricted the women's mobility in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, Indigenous women's mobility in the Chittagong Hill Tracts. That's one thing. Secondly is the patriarchy has limited created a limited voice among Indigenous women, as well as a decision-making process. Women are not the decision makers due to the patriarchy. So the violations of this state and as well as family, both positions, both situations made vulnerable and marginalized to the Indigenous women. I can tell that meanwhile, a large number of Indigenous women who have been working in the informal sector like beauty parlor in the capital city have lost their jobs suddenly. A few thousand Indigenous women from the plainland, apart from Chittagong Hill Tracts, I said that in the plainland, Indigenous peoples in Bangladesh living in the also plainland. A few thousands of Indigenous women called Garo, working in the beauty parlor industries, had to return to their villages without alternative job security. And the second is the violence against Indigenous women and girls remain rampant despite the pandemic outbreak and the lockdown situations. but I have observed that there are some cases of the violence against indigenous women, including rape, abductions, murder, and physical attack were reported from the human rights activist organizations. So I would like to say that in the decision-making process and restricted of the mobility due to the militarizations and patriarchy equally, I want to say that women are not in decision-making process and they are not decision maker. They are only knowledge keepers in the sector of agriculture, education, family. They are still working as they are preserving patriarchy and they are implementing the patriarchy. So I think the educated women, I just don't want to compare, but the educated women, they already realize the situations and they are trying to overcome that. But the customs and the culture is not built is one day. So I think it's difficult to change the culture, but we keep up our hope and we look forward for changing the world by the leadership of women. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we can all agree that countries where women are leading and taking decisions are doing much better during COVID. So I hope that that comes true for as many spaces as possible. Uh, Florian Mendoza, if you could respond also to the question about decision making and leadership vis-a-vis the indigenous women. Uh, I don't see her, but maybe she's lost her connectivity.
So, good afternoon. Good
Yes,
afternoon.
great. Yes.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah. In my experience, I was formed part of that first Bangsamoro Transition Commission to draft that basic law. But because at the time I am still young, so there are issues or concerns about the indigenous people that I am raising in the plenary. But since they always ask about my decision or my stand, especially on issues that will protect the rights of indigenous peoples, and because it's a more male member of that transition commission, and there are only I think few women, including me in that commission, then they would ask the help of my father of why I decided, for instance, about my resentment and my decision in those policies that has been tackled, for instance, in the plenary. And then they ask the guidance of my father instead of asking me directly. And then I asked my father, and then what has been you said to those some fellow members of the commission. Then my father told me that I think I raised my child very well. She is already in the right age for whatever decision that she will take. If she has resentment, because maybe she is not representing herself, but she's representing the people that who are relying on her as representative to echo the voice. So that's how my father answers about that. So it's really a challenging the issue of gender. So being a young woman as member of that male-dominated parliament that I was formed part before, so it's very challenging. And also in the mainstream governance, because a while ago I mentioned you about there are two structures: the traditional structure, which is based on the customary law of the indigenous people, and the role of indigenous women. The challenge usually here, because there are only few who are now handing down these traditional roles. So there are a lot of challenges about how the next generation will follow these traditional roles. For instance, like traditional birth attendant, like being an arbiter or a kofeduan libun or a ritualist. The young ones now no longer appreciate that one, but they better do the selfie making or at the internet or with this computer aids rather than having this traditional role to be strengthened, because this will, of course, recognize them and their identity being an indigenous people. So we have a challenges regarding that. And even in the mainstream politics, for instance, there are only few indigenous women who are elected in the formal mainstream politics, because first you have an influence, second you have logistics, and thirdly, because we have also a high illiteracy level. So for women to be in this kind of uh, mm, platform is very challenging for us, and especially so because we also came from the conflict affected area. So more often we do all these roles, and then the preparation of the community meetings, for instance, all this nitty gritty, the cooking activity is done by IP women. And so when there are gathering, it's always the male who are sitting down and discussing these issues while women are at the kitchen. So this is how, this is the one of the challenges also that the indigenous women, for instance, especially in southern Philippines, in the community where I'm living, is currently facing.
Thank you so much for your insight, Froilyn Mendoza. Is Zhao back here? Can we see her?
Jolene lost her connection.
Oh, she lost her
Okay,
connection.
thank you.
All right. So I just wanted to, before we end this session and go towards the last leg of the session, I wanted to ask the panelists to give us their inputs, maybe two recommendations, one for within Indigenous Women's Network, what do you recommend should be done to foster a more, vocal presence, and two, what can the feminist network do to support and walk in power with the Indigenous women? From your perspective, what are some recommendations so that we can take these conversations further together? So,
and there's a question, I think, in the question and answer.
oh, there's one more question which has come. So, okay, before we go into the recommendation, we have got one question. So we will take this question, and the question is how gender role is divided in Indigenous women. Is there a clear lines like women should do domestic chores while men will have public chores, and how traditional norms or values or culture present in gender roles and affect Indigenous women's life? So we will start again with Nadine, and then Bipasha, and then Froilyn Mendoza. Nadine, are you there?
Okay. As I said earlier, that indigenous communities, indigenous communities is fully practicing patriarchy, because we have customary laws and society. So we are practicing patriarchy, and in the decision-making process, women are not involved with that, but partially, and they are supporting the family. That's one thing. And the second is the gender role is the same thing. The patriarchy, women are working. For example, I'm working outside, and after coming back home, still working for a house, for kids, for daughter, son, and my extended family, my community. But so is due to the patriarchy. So the divisions of works, divisions of roles, still needs to be improved, and we have to work, and we have to work long. We have to go long. And there are many, there are long steps to ensure equality and equity in the indigenous communities. So regarding the indigenous women's knowledge, I can give recommendations, recommendations that indigenous women need solidarity to defeat not only COVID-19 virus, but also to maintain women's well-being, livelihoods, particularly health and health issues. So I would like to request to the participants or the organizations or the government, of course government, that to take initiatives to save women's knowledge and to share and share and spread the knowledge worldwide and give by giving recognitions, because I think that our government has a responsibility to protect women's or communities' livelihood in limiting COVID-19 limitations, uh, and that provided that any such kinds of measurements is non-discriminatory, uh, and and include the specific needs to promote and protect the priorities of indigenous women in addressing the global outbreak of COVID-19. That's one thing. Second, I already said that we should continue our research on women's knowledge that should be widely circulated among the feminists, among the world citizens, so that people women get women feel empowered to keep their leadership by preserving or by keeping their knowledge for the well-being of the society and the community. Thank you, Shreya.
Thank you so much, Bipasha. Thank you. Are Nedine or Froilyn Mendoza here?
Terima kasih. Saya akan menjawab pertanyaan. Mohon maaf tadi kurang terdengar karena.
Let me try to answer the question. I'm sorry, I couldn't really hear properly because of the rain. So in terms of the division of roles within indigenous communities and for indigenous women in Indonesia, it varies in my community in Minahasa because our tradition is egalitarian. Women and men are equal. We can see my dad in the kitchen. He cooks a lot for us. My mother she works in local government with other indigenous leaders and local government leaders, but in other indigenous communities, women have no control over anything in their own small community, even within the domestic sphere. So a lot of indigenous women, their role is when there's a village meeting, they're responsible for just ensuring, do people have enough to eat? Do people have enough to drink? But when it comes to decision making, it's the men who dominate and the women don't have a voice. So division of gender roles, it really varies. And if you ask me, does it bring prosperity? Does it improve their welfare? We can't really even use that word because we're so far removed from it. Because for women, it's not just having control over natural resources, but we need to be free to express our rights, which is our right to speak, our right to voice an opinion. We need to be liberated. We need to have sovereignty over our own lives as well as the sources of our livelihoods and the sources that enable us to continue our lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadine. And would you like to respond also to the question about what recommendation you would make towards, the role of Indigenous women in knowledge sharing and what the feminist sisterhood can do together on this?
If there are Indigenous women that have sovereignty over themselves and their lands, what we want are for all Indigenous women in Indonesia to have sovereignty over themselves, over their lands, and that they can fully manage the lands and the resources left to them by their ancestors. And so, of course, we need a great deal of solidarity And what we are facing isn't just men, but a lot of women have the mentality of men. Our struggle is the mindset of men that men have as well as women have, where a lot of women occupy spaces of policy making and decision making. So even in the movement, we feel that the leaders of our movement still use the mindset of men. And so sometimes Indigenous women still find themselves tired. They lose their hope. And so, of course, we hope to always receive support so that we don't feel alone. We want to be connected to other Indigenous women from other parts of the world because for Indigenous women, we want to be able to have solidarity. So we need support and solidarity. And right now, when we are fighting for our rights to be recognized in the Constitution, we need support to have our voice heard so that the Indonesian government, the legislators, pass the bill on Indigenous people where it recognizes the rights of Indigenous people and fulfills our rights as Indigenous peoples, where it also contains the collective rights of Indigenous women. And we also need solidarity to urge the Indonesian government to reincorporate and discuss and pass the bill on the elimination of sexual violence, which actually has been excluded from legislative discussions or hearings. So this bill that should have addressed the rights of women of Indonesia to protect Indonesian women from sexual violence has been thrown out of parliament. And so we need extended and systematic support to fight for our rights as Indigenous women within our communities and outside of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadine, for your inputs. I would like to ask Florian Mendoza to respond to the question.
Then of their decisions, for instance, on the number of children, and the Supreme Datu, for instance, are uh, telling us about the issue of using contraceptives, that they do not like that the indigenous women be submitted to the use of this contraceptive because there are only few indigenous people in my community. So how can we multiply if we keep on telling to the IP women about these reproductive health issues? But the IP women, for instance, are keep on clamoring about because they bear child at an early age, as early as 14-year-old. They were already arranged by their parents, and most of the children have not provided with these basic services. For instance, sending the children to their school. So the IP women said that if they would submit to these reproductive health methods, would be beneficial for them because they don't want that their future be again transferred to their children. So we have issues regarding that. And then my recommendation, I think, is that before going to that recommendation, because women are also negotiators in the armed conflicts, especially in my community where we're still experiencing recurring conflict. So women usually are the one negotiating or talking to the armed groups in their villages. They are being sent by the husbands to be the negotiators because of the sensitivity whenever men are the one talking to this armed group. So the women play this very critical role, but they have no protection regarding this, especially if they. Hello, I'm still around. Can I
I think
continue?
yeah,
Okay.
your voice is on and off.
Yeah, because it's raining and I really had a
Okay.
problem with the internet connection. Protection of women, especially in divulging sensitive issues. So there's gonna be a protection about women on this particular aspect because of the safety of these women who will raise these issues and concerns, especially on issue of peace and security. So that's one of my recommendation. And then also in preparing the young indigenous women who will become the ones to be handed down by this traditional role, which I think is very vital for the empowerment of these indigenous women. And not just one, maybe aside from the capacity development regarding indigenous women, it is also accompanied by a livelihood opportunity for them to be able also to answer those basic issues and concerns that they are facing, especially in the light of this pandemic, wherein livelihood is really a challenge for IP women and access to the basic social services is also a challenge. So I think that's all, and thank you. Good afternoon.
So, my thanks to all the panelists for responding to all the questions and for highlighting some very important issues, from police brutality to urban migration to the need for figuring out better ways of getting livelihood and sustainability. Though the indigenous community does do barter system and does have their own resilience methodology, but there's also a need for a way in which they can have better access to be able to share their knowledge and to share their livelihood skills with others. So this has been a fantastic afternoon for me. I have really enjoyed listening in and getting so much inspiration, and especially with regards to food security and becoming food reliable. I think all the women on this panel talked about it, and that was beautiful, and that was something that is definitely needed, and shows how the indigenous communities are more adept and more resilient in facing a crisis such as a pandemic or climate change, even because they are food resilient, and how far removed from the city are we all are from our food. So with that, I'd like to invite Anne-Marie to give the closing remarks for this wonderful panel. And we look forward to having these conversations continue in the future with all of you. And we hope that some of the recommendation we can all work together on. So thank you so much. Over to Anne-Marie now.
Thank you, Shreya. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. I'm really overwhelmed. And on behalf of the whole international office team, I would really like to thank you for this precious session, the organizers, moderation, and these inputs. As a social anthropology, I'm really overwhelmed with all these knowledge shared on the platform now. And I see the importance of our international global network to share, to spread, to disseminate all these rich experiences. And I just would like to underline two things. There's so many things I would like to repeat and give the necessary importance you were willing to share with us of all your daily experiences, historic experiences, cultural knowledge, and of course the whole knowledge about agriculture, access to land, collectivity, and so on and so forth. I'm so overwhelmed, for example, by how indigenous women started to use digital platforms, not only to share their knowledge, but even to put on some online entrepreneurship projects. Really, really exciting. And the other thing I would like to underline how indigenous women maintain the health situation, even in times of pandemics. I think we really have to learn a lot about this. We have to learn in Switzerland, the health system is okay, but when it comes to emergencies, we see how the health system is limited, how it's really challenged by the situation of pandemics. So this knowledge, we want to share it, we want to spread it, and hopefully we can use our international global platform of peace women across the globe. Also, I think in the sense of Ruth Gabi Vermont, our director, she is a risk group, we call it here, but she is so strong, and I think this will be a very good message to send over the world, how effective they are limiting, using their traditional knowledge, using their practices, limiting the impact of COVID-19. Really, thank you so much. And also another learning, how important it is to fight globally against masculine mindsets. We are all somehow offended by masculinities, by patriarchal structures. So we need a global feminist network to be strong and to really push forward our solidarity, forms of working together, of spreading feminist democracy and transformation. Thank you so much. Looking forward for the next sessions. Thank you, Shreya, for the moderation. Thanks.
So with this, we are almost at the end of this panel, and Zhao Ling has spoken to Kiu Chi, and she has given her inputs. She says our biggest support to the indigenous community is to reduce environmental contamination and pollution. And because she had bad internet connection, she couldn't join us. And we are going to now end this session with a little PowerPoint presentation about Indigenous women from across Asia. Before I end it, I would like to acknowledge and thank everybody who made this conference possible. Lizing, Karen, Olin, the PWAG team in Switzerland, and Anne-Marie and Gabby and everybody who was there. And above all, obviously, the panelists who shared their knowledge with us. And we look forward to seeing you all continue engaging with us in the next panel, and also joining us tomorrow for the panel for intergenerational learning. The next panel, I think, is the youth panel. So with that, thank you very much for a wonderful afternoon. And we will end with a little song and a PowerPoint presentation. Thank you.
You have to...